Well, hello once again, boys and girls. Time for another edition of Mr. Henderson Plays Video Games while talking about Romeo and Juliet. Today we are going to take a look at Act 1, Scene 2 of the play. So, in Act 1, Scene 1, we had a massive fight between the Capulets and the Montagues. And then Romeo came out after the fight and was like, "Oh, I'm so sad. I'm Romeo. I'm like super sad." Ugh. So, in Act 1, Scene 2, you can kind of think of it as broken into two parts. In the first part of the scene, we are introduced to a character, Paris. And if last week you watched my character analysis of the Capulets, you will know that I feel bad for Paris because, as you're going to learn throughout this play, he is a nice guy. He is, by all accounts, someone that Juliet should be with, and for whatever reason, she's like, "No, I want Romeo. Give me Romeo throughout this play." So it's for that reason that while playing some Mario Kart today, that I'm going to pick the character Luigi, as it says it's unable to connect to other consoles. Let's try this again. So I'm going to pick Luigi because if you know anything about the Mario universe, you know that Luigi, by all accounts, is every bit as equal as Mario. He can do all the same things. He can shoot fireballs just like Mario. He can do everything Mario does. And yet, for whatever reason, it's Mario that garners all the attention and all the accolades and all the fame. So, as this race finishes up before we actually get to have a race with Luigi, the first part of Act 1, Scene 2 is the Count Paris is talking with Lord Capulet. That is ultimately Juliet's father. And they are talking about the prospect of marriage. And they are talking about, hey, like, should Paris and Juliet get married? And it's brought up, and I mentioned this in the character analysis. It is brought up that Juliet's kind of young to get married. And even for the 1600s, Lord Capulet, Juliet's dad, makes this point when the idea of marriage is brought up of like, hey, wait a second. She's not even 14 yet, which, if you do the math, 14 minus 1, Juliet is 13 in this play, which, again, even by Shakespearean standards, and even though prearranged marriages were a thing, that's really young. Like, really, really young. Greatest love story ever told, Romeo and Juliet, 13 years old. And Paris, well, again, I feel sorry for him throughout this play, and he is an all around nice guy. He's kind of like, well, we can make it work. And even though Capulet, in the beginning, he's like, yeah, she's really young, pretty much flips the script right away. And it's like, yeah, you know what, you're right. Yeah, whatever. Who cares? Who cares that she's only 13? If you can convince her that you're the one, then I will sign off that you two can get married. And so what they're going to do is there's going to be a party that night. Mind you, that the fight that you just read in Act 1, Scene 1, happened that same day. But you know what? Forget it. They're going to have a fight, or they're going to have a party. They already had the fight. They're going to have a party, as I'm in dead last. Great work. You would never know that I've been playing this game since I was 8 years old. But I'm talking about Romeo and Juliet, so it's distracting. As I hit a Goomba. So they're going to have a party. And Capulet tells him, he's like, look, if you can convince Juliet to fall in love with you, then I will agree to sign off on you two getting married. Because ultimately, I just want my daughter to be happy. And that's pretty much where it's left off with. So we don't see a lot of Paris in the scene, but we are introduced to him. And again, as I'm going to point out throughout, he's the one guy that I consistently feel sorry for. So, the really second half of Act 1, Scene 2 is going to involve a character, Peter. And Peter is the nurse's servant. He's a servant of the Capulets, but you haven't met the nurse yet, but he is a servant of the nurse. And Peter has been assigned the role, as I'm going to switch to Yoshi, because Yoshi's my boy. As much as I'd love me some Luigi, I gotta get done with Yoshi. That was a bad showing by me. So Peter's been assigned to track people down for this party that they're going to have. Keep in mind, this is the 1600s, so they can't just send an invite out on Snapchat or TikTok. They can't just go, "Hey, wild party tonight, yeah, random dance move," or whatever dance move they were hitting in the 1600s. I have no idea. The moral of the story is, Peter has to go out and find these people. There's one problem with Peter. He can't actually read. And he says this. He's like, "Man, I wish I could read. That would solve a lot of my problems." Well, as fate turns out, he runs into Benvolio and Romeo, who happen to be wandering the streets. And he says, hey guys, I can't read. Can you help me out? And so they do. And so they're reading the list of people who are invited to this party. And so a very relevant name pops up on this list. And it's a girl by the name of Rosaline. Now, I told you in the last scene, and I told you in the character analysis, that when this play begins, Romeo is not actually in love with Juliet. He is in love with a girl by the name of Rosaline. And that's, who he just spends his time whining about. It's like, "Oh, Rosaline. I love Rosaline. I can't live without Rosaline." There's one problem. Rosaline doesn't actually love him back. And so he finds out through Peter that the Capulets are going to host a party and that Rosaline is going to be at it. Now, there's one problem to all of this, is beyond the fact that Rosaline doesn't love him back, it's a Capulet party. So it's not exactly like Romeo and Benvolio are going to be invited, because they are Montagues. But Romeo's just like, "Oh, Rosaline's going to be there. I want to be at this party. I want to be like Yoshi driving off the edge. Yeah." And so he finds out she's going to be there, and he's just like, I've got to be there. I've got to do it. And Benvolio kind of eggs him on in this, and is just kind of like, "You know what, man, just if that works for you, then by all means go for it, man. Like, but you also got to have an open mind and be willing to accept other girls at this party. Like, you can't just hold yourself up into thinking that nobody but Rosaline is the one." And that's kind of where Act 1, Scene 2 leaves off, is they disperse and go from there. So, ignoring the really poor showing of Mario Kart, I hope this quick analysis has given you some context as to Act 1, Scene 2. Please just make sure you read that. Make sure you've read Act 1, Scene 1 as well. And next week, we will be finishing